Right now, a bomb has exploded. Kiev is preparing an arsenal of weapons, and Russia is about to be hit by a fiery whirlwind. Something like this has never happened before. Western fighter jets and more are entering the battle, long-range firepower is on the way, and this is what the Kremlin feared most of all. An exclusive, everything for Ukraine, a look behind the scenes of war leaders, unprecedented alliances, and negotiations that could shake up geopolitics. A secret decision has been made. You'll be shocked when you hear it. Ukraine and the US are preparing a breakthrough in weaponry, an Armageddon in arms production. Cruise missiles and attack drones are rolling out of the factories in much greater numbers. This isn't just preparation, it's the start of a deadly campaign that will destroy Russia. Crimea is burning, the mass strikes aren't stopping, and the latest attacks on fuel and military facilities have turned the peninsula into a hotspot. People have started to flee in panic. These aren't just strikes, this is the systematic destruction of the enemy's rear. The Russians have simply been driven off the peninsula, and we covered all of this in our episode Hotspot. Urgent news, a mega deal that will shake Moscow. Ukraine and the US are preparing a breakthrough in weaponry. Zelensky has made an incredible announcement. Now, legendary missiles are on the way, capable of reaching the heart of Russia. The decision is near. The Kremlin is facing a real apocalypse. Where could these super missiles strike? Watch for all the details.
A complete turnaround. Very soon, the White House will provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance stated this over the weekend in an interview with Fox News, and just 2 days later, U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg confirmed the intention. Trump will allow Ukraine to carry out long-range strikes on Russia.
I think that after reading what he said, as well as what Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio said, the answer is yes. Utilize this valuable opportunity to strike effectively at long range. There is absolutely nothing sacred or untouchable about it. And that, in fact, is one of the primary reasons why I firmly believe President Zelensky specifically asked President Trump for those Tomahawk missiles just last week.
Just 2 weeks ago, Trump and his administration were categorically opposed to transferring, let alone using, American Tomahawk missiles to strike Russian territory. But after Zelensky and Trump met in New York on September 23rd, the White House's rhetoric changed. Ukraine's main argument is that having such missiles could increase pressure on Russia and force Putin to come to the negotiating table, possibly even without actually using this type of weapon. The transfer of Tomahawks also drew a response from the Kremlin. Putin's press secretary Peskov stated that there is no magic weapon for Kyiv that can change the dynamics on the battlefield.
There is no panacea that can change the situation at the front for Kyiv right now. No magic weapon for the Kyiv regime that can change the situation at the front. There is no magic weapon. Laughter. Tomahawk missiles have
a range of up to 1,600 kilometers, which is significantly greater than the capabilities of the American HIMARS rocket systems, ATAC-MS, that the Ukrainian armed forces are using. The Tomahawk has high speed and combat power compared to Ukrainian drones, which are capable of striking deep into Russian territory but often encounter modern Russian air defense systems.
It's a bad message for the military and those assisting them who are located in the Bryansk, Kursk, Voronezh, and Rostov regions at the very least, and of course in the occupied territories, anywhere there are enemy military facilities. I believe that the demilitarization of Crimea from Russian presence will continue, and Donetsk, Kupiansk, and Luhansk will be targeted even more.
President Zelensky gave President Trump a list of the necessary aid as part of a $90 billion agreement. And Ukraine also wants to hold separate negotiations with the US regarding the supply of specific types of weapons, particularly long-range ones.
All of this is included in our $90 billion agreement, but we are also ready for separate contracts for specific types of weapons, including long-range ones. I can't share any more details.
According to
the British publication The Sun, Ukrainian attacks on the oil refining sector alone have caused Russia more than $100 billion in damage. And that's without Tomahawk missiles. Once they appear, the scale of the damage will increase many times over.
Last night, Crimea was engulfed by a fiery avalanche. A gasoline apocalypse has arrived and Russians are fleeing in panic. Ukraine's triumph, a torrent of weapons for the armed forces of Ukraine. This will turn the tide at the front. Kellogg announced it. The order is already on Trump's desk. Putin screamed when he heard about it. All the details are in the report.
The temporarily occupied Crimea is once again under drone attack. An oil depot in Feodosia is ablaze. This is already the second large-scale fire at the refinery. The previous one happened in October last year and lasted a week. Despite the strikes, the occupying forces are using a new site to launch drones, specifically from the temporarily occupied peninsula. Now the Kremlin is stockpiling munitions and building launch pads for their deployment.
The absolutely key and most crucial factor is not merely the number of drone launch sites available, but rather the comprehensive total number of aerodynamic strike assets themselves, which are capable of delivering significant impact. And the Russian Federation possesses the capability to scale up and produce up to 1,000 drones. Western media outlets have reported on this development.
And in Crimea, there's a gasoline collapse. Kilometer-long lines and a total shortage at gas stations.
Wow, this is just great. Unbelievable. Everyone is driving around it. Looks like gasoline just showed up here.
Drivers are forced to stand in long lines for a minimal amount of fuel. The authorities in Sevastopol have announced that now you can only fill up to 30 liters at a time, either into your car's tank or into a canister.
People, what is this even? Now, in order to refuel, I have to somehow get some paperwork with certain coupons. By the way, the current price for 95-octane gasoline here is 78 rubles, primarily because with the available coupons, it's 5 rubles less per liter. That's fine.
As usual, the occupation authorities are calling for calm, but the crisis is reaching record levels.
In short, the situation with gasoline isn't changing. There's no 900, no 95, not even 92. In short, only diesel is left.
I specifically drove around the Tiesatan gas stations. There's no gasoline in the city at all, only diesel is available. That's it, the whole line is for that gas station.
At the same time, a black market is developing, with many online ads offering gasoline in canisters at inflated prices.
We offer you 95-octane gasoline and also 95-octane from a station equipped with a dual filtration system. There is coarse filtration, fine filtration, and accordingly, a high-precision meter is installed in the dispenser, which has been calibrated using a fuel gauge.
In Crimea and Sevastopol, as of the end of September, about 50% of gas stations had stopped selling gasoline.
According to Russian estimates, at present, about 25% of gas stations have either partially or completely ceased operations. This is the same ongoing crisis, taking into account that drone strikes by the main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, the Ukrainian Defense Forces, Special Operations Forces, and Unmanned Systems Forces have mainly targeted imported equipment at oil refineries.
Meanwhile, American media report that Keith Kellogg, the special representative of the U.S. president, stated that Donald Trump has authorized Ukraine to carry out long-range strikes on the territory of the aggressor country, Russia. At the same time, U.S. Vice President Jay Divins shared that Trump has not yet made a final decision regarding the sale of Tomahawk missiles to European countries, which then plan to send them to Ukraine.
The Ukrainian side comments on the strike using domestically produced weapons against oil facilities, but the emergence of this information precisely at the peak of media activity about the United States granting Ukraine the right to strike legitimate targets on the territory of the occupying country raises certain thoughts.
And Sweden may transfer Gripen multi-role fighter jets to Ukraine, but no decision has been made on this issue yet.
The Swedish side made a clear statement that the transfer of these fighter jets is only possible after the end of active combat operations in Ukraine. Gripens can use runways of varying quality, even regular roads, and in addition to their price and quality, they are much more functional in terms of maintenance compared to the F-16.
Meanwhile, NATO is preparing for possible provocations from Russia. Denmark has called up several hundred reservists due to drone incidents in the country's airspace. The soldiers have been ordered to report as soon as possible.
A sensation, a bloody deal in the Kremlin. Putin and Lukashenko were locked in talks for 5 hours, but Batka let something slip. What the dictators were really negotiating about, the details will shock you. This could turn into a catastrophe for the entire region. Details are in the report.
The Belarusian Batka, who is both the main idol and sycophant of the Russian dictator, is once again in the spotlight.
I can put it simply. In Russia and Belarus, we need to follow in the footsteps of our two presidents. Take our relationship to the next level. Absolutely close. President Putin doesn't have such a relationship with anyone else as he does with Belarus. That's only natural. We are allies.
Mr. Lukashenko arrived in Moscow to pay homage to dictator Putin. The meeting took place in the Kremlin. The negotiations between these two old men lasted more than 5 hours.
We meet in the summer. It's been a long time since we've seen each other.
We have long understood the position that Belarus, the so-called Union State, finds itself in, essentially a vassal dependent on the will of both Moscow and Beijing. That's why Lukashenko's traditional visit to Putin doesn't seem particularly fateful or to carry any especially important message, except for one point. Indeed, Lukashenko maintains fairly active contacts with the American administration, which in principle is yet another confirmation that Washington has not completely abandoned its plan to resolve the war through diplomatic means, and that Lukashenko will still bring certain messages from the Americans to Putin.
Of course, the main topic of conversation between the two senile men was the war in Ukraine. Lukashenko even stated that he wants to meet with Zelensky.
I would just really like to talk to him. And perhaps this is exactly the precise moment when, if it is indeed voiced in Russia by you, I truly have something important to say to him. And I truly think that the time has now come when we absolutely need to start comprehensive consultations. As I have said before, we, the esteemed leaders of the three Slavic sister states, truly need to agree upon definitively ending this utterly senseless and devastating war.
And the potato father also said that together with Putin they have a good proposal for ending the war, which was heard even in Alaska, including by Donald Trump.
We ourselves need to calm down. There is a good proposal on the table. President Putin and I discussed it. I won't talk about the details. Let the president himself announce the good proposal.
Basically, this is the same story that has already been made public before. Ukraine must give up part of its territory, Ukraine must abandon joining NATO, and EU membership is also in question. And a bunch of other demands that are simply made up in Putin's fevered imagination. All of this is just a continuation of the manipulations we've seen earlier from the Kremlin, aimed at delaying or postponing the moment when tough decisions are made against Russia.
But the self-proclaimed president of Belarus is of course convinced that their plan will save the world, and if Kiev rejects this scenario, then Ukraine will disappear.
If Ukrainians don't accept these proposals, it will be just like it was at the very beginning. It will be even worse. They will lose Ukraine. Back then they should have stopped. Listen, the entire East would have been Ukrainian, except for Crimea. But they didn't stop, and they lost the East. If they don't stop now, from my point of view, as someone deeply involved in this situation, they will lose all of Ukraine.
Yes, more empty threats from Lukashenko. If Putin had the ability to seize more of Ukraine than he has so far, he obviously would have done it. The ambitions of the Kremlin dictator were far greater than just the destroyed Ukrainian villages in Donbass. Putin dreamed of Kyiv, Putin dreamed of Dnipro, Putin even dreamed of reaching Lviv. It is obvious that the army does not have the resources or capabilities to carry out these plans. All that remains are the classic bureaucratic Soviet-style threats about we can do it again, or we can capture more, but it's obvious that at this point all of this is just empty bluster with no real arguments behind it that anyone should be afraid of.
There were also threats directed at NATO. In a conversation with journalists, the Belarusian dictator shared his thoughts on the potential downing of aircraft violating the alliance's airspace, saying that the response would be immediate.
For example, I often fly to the Belovezhskaya Pushcha, which is right on the border with Poland. What, are they going to shoot down the president's helicopter, or maybe some military escort helicopter? But the response would come instantly. This isn't the war in Ukraine. They're worried and trying to scare us with talk of an attack on a NATO country. That means they'll defend themselves and practically attack us. And what? Are we just supposed to sit back and do nothing? So it's quite a bold statement.
In reality, you know, it's like how a little dog always barks louder than a big one. And in this context, Lukashenko is the clearest example of how a helpless, self-proclaimed president can make threats to NATO countries that are completely out of proportion to his actual capabilities. But obviously, he is echoing Russian propaganda, trying to intimidate in general. Yes, these incidents and provocations from the Russian Federation are nothing more than a way to test the reaction from the EU and NATO.
Lukashenko only showed courage while in the Kremlin, but upon returning home, the Batka admitted that things are not as rosy as they seem, and that there are plenty of problems both in Russia and in Belarus.
How are we supposed to survive in these difficult times? Russia, an empire, vast, rich, with immeasurable wealth. And yet today we have to think about how to survive together. You'd think, what's there to worry about? Everything is right at our feet, but it's not like that at all. The world is being carved up into pieces. They're tearing it apart in chunks. This is yours, that is yours, and they're starting to strangle us. They won't leave us alone.
Survive however you want. After all, you yourselves have led the country into isolation.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
It happened. Moscow's favorites in Moldova on the Russian ticket crashed out of the parliamentary race with a bang. Millions of dollars spent on bribery and propaganda went up in smoke. In Moscow, they broke out in screams. This is a failure. Does this mean that Moldova has closed its doors to the Kremlin forever and put an end to a Russian future? Shocking details in the report.
Russia is trying to do to Moldova what Iran once did to Lebanon. The global response is insufficient. We've already lost Georgia in Europe.
Decisive elections for Moldova. A historic and fateful result. Just barely in Europe. We're not wanted there.
There's propaganda from all sides.
Everything will be fine. If only there were peace. Europe or a return to the Kremlin's orbit.
It's always important to say this. Our civic duty, our future, we hope for it.
It's very important to participate in the voting to change our future. If we want a better future in our country so we don't have to go abroad like our parents did.
A year ago, the country elected a president and in a referendum confirmed its course toward European integration. But pro-Russian forces are not missing any opportunity to steal Moldova's chance to break free forever. Russian shackles.
For peace, for continued rapprochement with Europe, for the continuation of European investments in the Republic of Moldova, and I hope for an improvement in the human rights situation if Moldova integrates with Europe.
The outcome of the parliamentary elections is very important because in Moldova it is the deputies who make key decisions, including the country's foreign policy direction. That means whoever controls the parliament controls the country. In total, more than 20 parties participated in the 2025 elections. The main battle unfolded between the president's party and the pro-Russian bloc of Igor Dodon. The pro-European party, led by President Maia Sandu, has held a parliamentary majority since 2021. And today, the Action and Solidarity Party received 50.2% of the votes after 100% of the protocols were processed. The parliamentary opposition parties together received a total of 43.95%. But the Kremlin is not satisfied with this. Dodon stated that his supporters should come to the parliament to defend the victory. The main threat could be a plot to organize mass riots. There have already been signs. More than 100 athletic men were detained in Serbia. They were being trained to break through police cordons and seize weapons. In Chisinau, they are convinced that Russian military intelligence, the GRU, is behind this operation. The Patriotic Bloc is an alliance of the pro-Russian ex-president, socialist Igor Dodon, and his allies. Dodon denies any Russian interference in the upcoming July elections this year. He personally traveled to Moscow and declared that he would not support sanctions against the Kremlin. He also planned to resume purchasing Russian gas and believes that both sides are to blame for the war in Ukraine.
Once again, PAS is holding on to power thanks to the diaspora. Once again, the diaspora will do everything possible to ensure that Maia Sandu and these yellows remain in power. But we are not giving up. We have submitted all the documents to the Central Election Commission in accordance with the law, including the violations that we believe took place.
Moscow, however, prepared in advance.
Dear Igor Nikolaevich, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen.
Russia has intensified its online disinformation campaign, and the activity of the Kremlin-backed Matryoshka network, which creates fake media, has resumed. We
know that the Russian Federation is actively interfering in the elections in Moldova. Moldova, our common home, is in danger. And right now, each of you is important. You can save it with your vote. Moscow's stakes are very high, which is why it is pouring resources into the elections in Moldova. This isn't just about us, it's about the war in Ukraine.
Vote buying, organizing protests, and propaganda.
You don't need to show your face there. You don't need to use your real name there. Let's comment. They give us a topic every day. and we make it on TikTok.
Russia's attempts to influence the course and outcome of this vote are among the strongest in recent years. 2 pro-Russian parties were disqualified on the eve of the elections. The police discovered that they were using illegal sources of funding, foreign money, but they worked off the Kremlin's money. One of them was connected to the fugitive businessman and admirer of the Russian world, Elon Shor, who lives in Moscow. Among the parties that made it into Moldova's parliament, Democracy at Home, led by Vasile Kostyuk, stands out, a unionist, supporter of uniting Moldova with Romania, and a Trumpist who is skeptical about supporting Ukraine. The country's electoral infrastructure was subjected to a series of cyber attacks, as a result of which about 4,000 websites stopped working. There were reports of alleged bomb threats at several overseas polling stations, violations of voting secrecy, photographing of ballots, group voting, illegal campaigning, and the presence of unauthorized individuals at polling stations.
The Kremlin's failure last year forced it to spend even more money and involve even more people in activities aimed at influencing and sabotaging the elections in the Republic of Moldova.
Pro-Russian forces in Moldova have vast financial resources, receiving funding from Moscow and actively making use of propaganda support. Some pro-Russian parties in Moldova ran in the elections under the guise of being pro-European to confuse voters.
There are indeed many individuals who actively spread this kind of propaganda. Yes, you can definitely feel its pervasive influence.
The influence of pro-Russian forces on politics in Moldova can have far-reaching consequences, such as using Transnistria as leverage. This region, supported by Moscow, still remains a stronghold where Soviet ammunition depots and a Russian military contingent are stationed.
The Russians really want to influence Moldova. And how do they influence it? It all starts with politics. If you have your own parties in parliament, then your own government, then presidents, and a military presence.
Shock. Trump comments on Putin. This blew up the information space. An emergency address from the White House. Nothing like this has ever happened before. The armed forces of Ukraine have been given the green light. Moscow, get ready. This turned the sky Dnipro hell. Putin's empire is falling apart. Details coming next.
US President Trump will deliver an address from the White House today. The topic has not been disclosed. But before that, Trump will attend an emergency meeting of hundreds of American generals and admirals from around the world, organized by Secretary of War Hexet.
Many generals want to come and see our military might. They are planning to visit weapons storage sites. They will talk about the latest weaponry and so on. I think it's great when generals and high-ranking officers want to come and meet with our current Secretary of War. I hope everyone likes this new title. I really do.
In fact, Hexet himself personally has major issues with perception within the army. After a series of scandals that followed his appointment as Minister of Defense related to signal message leaks, his overall standing and authority were rather discredited. Therefore, gathering everyone together, synchronizing their positions, and once again setting the priorities for the external defensive and now offensive policies of the United States will be the main task.
What will actually be discussed at this meeting is still the subject of much speculation, but Trump's circle is actively trying to prove that there is nothing unusual about such a gathering.
There isn't much information yet about what exactly Hexet plans to discuss with his generals, but it's clear that the US is preparing for some more concrete actions, both towards Russia and towards China, and not without reason. Trump has renamed the Department of Defense, calling it the Department of Offense, the Department of War.
They might discuss selling long-range missiles to Ukraine. After all, the US President's Special Envoy Kellogg stated that Trump has already authorized Ukraine to carry out long-range strikes on Russia. I
think that after reading what he said, as well as what Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio said, the answer is yes. Use the opportunity to strike at long distances. There are no sanctuaries on Russian territory.
As for those same Tomahawk missiles and the US authorization to strike targets deep inside Russia, for now it looks more like intimidation. It's similar to what we saw in the context of the Graham-Ably-Menthol bill, which appeared right before the first meetings in Turkey when the Ukrainian and Russian delegations met. At that time, they were trying to use the issue of tariffs as an additional lever of pressure on the Russian Federation.
Meanwhile, in Russia, they are trying to form the budget for the next year and have decided to sharply raise prices on vodka and tobacco, as well as VAT, just to fill the budget with something. At the same time, expense for maintaining Putin and the presidential administration, as well as state television channels, will actually increase in 2026, up to 33.164 billion rubles, respectively.
The key bill of the autumn session is the budget law, the main financial law of the country. We are working on it, discussing how to ensure that all obligations to citizens are fulfilled despite the large number of sanctions imposed against our country.
It is obvious that there are huge problems in Putin's economy, and every month the budget deficit amounts to 1 trillion rubles, and in just the first 7 months of this year, the deficit has already exceeded the figures that were planned for the entire year. Therefore, Putin's tax increases are quite predictable, but that doesn't mean this colossus with feet of clay will collapse all at once.
It turns out that only the obligations to Putin and the propagandists will be fulfilled, while ordinary citizens will pay for it out of their own pockets. But there's no need to be upset. At a budget planning meeting, the dictator stated that they can afford it. After all, it turns out that Russia's revenues are only growing. As for
the federal budget, the situation here is stable. Even the federal budget's oil and gas revenues increased by 14% from January to July. Year over year, they amounted to 14.8 trillion rubles.
It's obvious that Putin doesn't care about the interests of his own people. If he needs to take the last penny from pensioners, teachers, children, orphans, he will do it without hesitation in order to send all necessary resources to continue this war.
And while in Russia, they keep trying to deceive the population to the very end and squeeze everything out of them for the war and to support the cronies and propaganda, in reality, Russia's economy will only continue to collapse because Western pressure is only getting stronger.
A breakthrough that is making Moscow crack. Reina is blowing up the assembly line. Production of Flamingo cruise missiles is increasing fourfold. This isn't just growth, it's a new reality that will turn the enemy's rear into a blazing target. Our engineers have achieved the impossible. Hundreds of deadly shells will reach the front line, and the skies over Russia will no longer be safe. And this is only the beginning. Not only missiles, but also drones and smart systems are preparing a fiery reckoning. All the details are in the report.
A new level in scale, Ukraine is ramping up the production of cruise missiles. The developers of the Ukrainian Flamingo missile stated that the company produces 50 missiles per month and plans to reach a daily output of 7 missiles by the end of the year. The company claims that scaling up is made possible by its own wing manufacturing technology, which shortens the production cycle. Let us recall that the Ukrainian missile can fly up to 3,000 kilometers and carry a ton of explosives. In August, the Flamingo struck Russian targets in the temporarily occupied Crimea. Early in the morning, 3 missiles were launched from the Ukrainian coast. The strike hit a base of Russian border guards, which is overseen by the Federal Security Service of the aggressor country. Additionally, the manufacturers of Flamingo have announced the development of their own ballistic missiles, the FP-7 and FP-9, as well as air defense systems. Thanks to private companies, Ukraine will be able to create defense industry innovations and effectively implement them on the battlefield.
It was precisely during the years of the full-scale invasion that Ukraine's defense industry made a revolutionary breakthrough in the production of Ukrainian ballistic missiles. First and foremost, this refers to the modernized version of Neptune. The anti-ship version of Neptune was upgraded to strike land targets. And at the moment, as a result of improved technical and tactical characteristics, according to the developer's assessment, Neptune's strike range is up to 1,000 kilometers. In addition, the Ukrainian defense forces are armed not only with the previously mentioned systems, but also with the operational tactical complex OPSAN. It has a strike range of up to 500 kilometers. Moreover, during the years of war, the Ukrainian defense forces have demonstrated a unique ability to modernize, even Soviet-era weapon models. We are talking about the S-200 surface-to-air missile system.
Another of the most important developments has been missile drones, such as Palanitsia, Peklo, Ruta, and Bars.
During the period of the large-scale invasion, Ukraine's defense industry has evolved in terms of producing its own strike weapons. And of course, let's not forget about the strike drones. Here, according to KLG, which is an official recognition of Ukraine's achievements, Ukraine holds leading positions in the world.
Ukrainian drone systems have successfully struck military targets in the Russian Federation, including oil refineries. Drone attacks have disabled up to 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity. Ukraine is also actively working on the production of interceptor drones. The Minister of Defense stated that Kyiv will soon reach the capacity to deploy at least 1,000 such UAVs per day to defend against Russian attacks.
Ukraine currently holds a leading position in the production of interceptor drones. This is Ukrainian science for understanding the situation during the latest provocation by the Russian Federation, specifically the violation of Polish airspace for neutralization purposes. Gerber decoy drones cost $10,000 each. NATO countries' air defense systems used missiles costing $1.5 million. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian side is currently scaling up the so-called tactic of inexpensive drones, specifically the use of interceptor drones.
Ukraine is also developing a new air defense system of the air-to-air class capable of covering significant territories. All this means that Ukrainian developers have demonstrated the ability to create high-precision weaponry capable of destroying important enemy military targets deep behind the lines.
That's all for now. For more major updates from the front, tune in to the next episode.